business. So please join me in welcoming Geoff tonight. Thank you.
Thank you everybody. Glad to be here tonight. So you probably looked at what we'll be talking about tonight and thought, seriously? Someone's going to talk about luck? Whose idea was it to get this going? As you might suspect, there's a lot more to it than that. We're going to get into that. I do want to ask a couple of questions just to get to know our group of folks a little bit better. How many people are from solo practices here tonight? A good number? And how about small practices, maybe 5 or fewer people? And how many from practices with maybe 6 or more people? Okay, so we've got a few represented from all those. Well, thank you. Welcome everybody for coming. How many of you would say your primary role in the practice that you're in is to work with technology? Okay, not many. How many would say your primary role is you're part of the law practice, you're delivering services to clients? Most. And how many would say you're an executive and they're focused just on running the practice? And how many of you raise your hands for all 3 things? A lot of people wear a lot of hats here. Who can venture a guess as to what CRM stands for?
What stands for?
What CRM stands for?
Customer relationship management.
Right, customer relationship management, or in law practice, maybe client relationship management. So that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And if I slip into acronymese and refer to it as CRM sometimes, you'll have a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is a session, a law tech session, and this session is a relationship. So let's combine the two. Let's get social with this. Behind me are some hashtags and some of the call names for myself as well as NC Law Tech. Tweet some while you're here. If you hear a good insight, tweet it. If you see something someone tweets that you want to remember, like it or retweet it or something like that. Unlike most of these things, what I'm going to tell you is don't put your phones away. Take your phones out. Sign into Twitter. Follow the hashtag C5Luck. It's actually being followed over on the left side of the screen up there. I hope you have better eyes than me because I'm right here. I can't read it. Some of you probably can. But if you follow it on your mobile device, you'll be able to see the tweets that come up. We at C5 Insight actually did some scheduled tweets. They've already been popping up some. They'll actually summarize some of what we talk about tonight, but there'll also be some bonus content in there. So everything from recommended reading to blogs that are associated with this to TED Talks, some of the content comes from. So there's a lot of good stuff there. If you don't look at it tonight, then remember the hashtag C5Luck. Go search for that tomorrow and you can get a lot of summary information as well as some new things that we just won't have time to cover here tonight. So I have good news and I have bad news for you. Let's start with the good news. So the good news is over the next few years, most of you will probably try or retry to implement a customer or client relationship management project. Why is that good news? That's good news because Nucleus Research tells us the average return on investment for a CRM project is about $5.60 for every dollar spent. So good news, it has a great return on investment for those of you who are going to attempt to implement it. But there's bad news too. The bad news is most of you will also fail at those projects. The information that we see tells us that 30%, in fact the same company that tells us that the average return is $5.60 for every dollar spent, Nucleus Research, also tells us 30% of CRM projects fail to produce any return at all. They're actually a loss for the organizations. Our research shows that about 30% more of those that do produce some return have a lot of problems with people adopting the software, a lot of frustration, a lot of issues with it that really frustrate people and result in suboptimal use of it. But every cloud has a silver lining, and the silver lining is we've spent a lot of time at C5 Insight researching why failure happens, and a big part of what we're going to talk about today are 5 steps you can take to help you prevent failure for your CRM initiative. So let's dive in. So every CRM project really focuses on 4 things, or every successful CRM project focuses on 4 things. Those 4 things are listening. So let's forget about technology for a second. Let's throw away this idea of CRM. Let's just go back to basic relationships in general. Every good relationship is built on listening. Every successful person with relationships does a great job of listening. There's vast troves of data about how some of the most successful and influential people in the world are people who actually invest more time in listening than they do in talking. Listening is absolutely key to developing relationships. In fact, there's an old sales saying that when you show up to work with a client, you don't show up and throw up, you show up and listen. Showing up and throwing up is showing up and telling your story. Showing up and listening is asking questions, digging, getting deeper and deeper, doing a lot of listening and remembering what the prospect or the client tells you. Relationships are all built on listening. The second area is this idea of understanding. Understanding is simply taking that information that you've remembered and putting it to use, understanding the person better. Stephen Covey tells us that our problem is not that we don't listen, it's that we listen with the intent to reply and not with the intent to understand. So if we listen with the intent to reply, we're actually going to forge a much stronger, better connection with people overall, which brings us to the next thing that relationships are built on, and that's this idea of connections. Once you have a firm foundation of listening and understanding, whether that be a friend, a client, a referral source, a peer, then you can start to leverage that information, that knowledge you've built by connecting better. But connecting isn't an art, it's a science. It too is a process, a set of steps that you consistently follow over time and you can fine tune. And then for the final step, you know what your results are. Knowing is tough because knowing means always looking and saying, how can I do this better? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Being vulnerable about your failures so that you can analyze those and get more successful over time. So it's a simple acronym. The luck principle. That's what the luck principle is. Listen, understand, connect, and know. And while the acronym is simple and it's natural, every one of us practices all four of these things to some extent or other. But most of us know it's anything but simple. There are very few people who've mastered all four, and most of us are probably really lacking in at least one of the four different areas. But what today we're going to talk about is this idea of how we apply luck in our businesses. When we discovered luck a bunch of years ago with C5 Insight, when we started applying it slowly transformed our business. And the important word there is slowly. Nothing that happens all at once. It changed how we managed our projects. It changed how we went to market and worked with our clients and prospects. Then it started changing our prospects as we consulted with heads of sales and CEOs and service representatives. It started to gradually transform their businesses, the way they connected with one another. And so we talk about it everywhere now. We talk about it to students in high school and college, all the way up to executive boardrooms. But today we're not going to talk about the relationship side. We're going to talk about the technology-driven side. We're going to talk about how do you take these four proven, timeless principles, luck, and how do you do them at scale? How do you manage more matters with more clients, with more referral sources, more efficiently than before, without adding people to your organization? How do you grow at scale? How do you practice relationship management at scale and not just one-on-one, life-on-life? So that's one thing we're going to talk about. The other thing we're going to talk about is something that was actually kind of recent discovery by our organization that was a shock. And that was one secret ingredient that really can determine very far in advance whether you're likely to be successful or not applying luck within your organization. So we're going to get back to that at the end of the session. That's our fifth area that we're going to focus on. So, who knows what this is?
Motorcycle.
Motorcycle. Excellent. Good job. What kind of motorcycle?
Harley.
Harley. That's right, a Harley Davidson. What kind of Harley Davidson? What's that?
Big one.
A big one. It is a big one. It's a fat boy. It's a soft-tailed fat boy Harley Davidson. But the truth of the matter is, this Harley Davidson is unlike any other Harley Davidson or any other motorcycle you'll see on the street. And the fact is, most Harley Davidsons are unlike the other Harley Davidsons that you'll see on the street. Harley Davidson is this pervasive name now, this incredible success story, but it wasn't always that way. In 1969, AMF, that's right, the bowling people, bought Harley Davidson. And when they bought them, they started managing them a little bit differently. The quality of the product went down, and they weren't keeping up with the innovations coming from some of the overseas motorcycle manufacturers. And they also started moving away from this ability to let people customize it, to make these different choppers and different looking motorcycles that they've gotten accustomed to. And the organization gradually fell further and further and closer to bankruptcy. And finally, in 1981, a group of executives in the organization, one of them named William G. Davidson, the grandson of one of the founders of Harley Davidson, who goes by Willie G for short, and he's their chief design engineer. 15 of those folks bought Harley-Davidson back from AMF and took the company over. Well, in just a few years, they had turned the company around. It was a completely different organization. In fact, they had to negotiate tariffs with the government to try to protect Harley-Davidson from foreign competition, and they voluntarily gave those tariffs up just 2 or 3 years after the takeover, saying, we don't need it anymore. We can stand on our own. We don't need the government to block foreign competition for us anymore. An amazing turnaround story. And people asked Willie G., who was given a lot of the credit for the turnaround, what did you do? He did a lot of things. He revolutionized the motors, added a lot of new features, created entirely new bikes in the lineup, but he also gave people back the ability to customize. But when people asked him what he did, he said, I listened to our customers. I just went out and I sat down with them and I listened to them. And I asked them what it is that they want. And by listening to them and doing something with that information, it absolutely turned our organization around. So Harley-Davidson is now has about 50% market share of their market in this country. Amazing market share for any organization to have. But one of the more amazing things is what else they make money on. So Harley-Davidson actually makes a tremendous amount of money. That's more like it. And who really likes to wear a blazer anyway, right? Harley-Davidson makes a tremendous amount of money on clothing. Their stores make an exorbitant amount of money on clothing. They sell tons of this ridiculously overpriced stuff. And the way they do it is through the loyalty that their customers have to the brand. You think about any brand out there. If you think about a car, how many people own a piece of clothing that has the logo of their car on it? Maybe you have 1 or 2 things. Or maybe if you look at something else that's a little more fan-oriented, like a rock band or a NASCAR racer or a sports team, people might have 1, 2, maybe 3 pieces of clothing that have the things that they're fans of in that respect. But when you look at people who ride Harley-Davidsons, they got a closet full of the stuff. It's unbelievable. And it's really ridiculously overpriced stuff. But Harley-Davidson listened to customers, turned their business around. It all started with the simple act of listening, an amazingly powerful tool for businesses. But listening isn't easy. We know in business it's a little bit different. We know in our businesses where we have to listen one-on-one and not kind of in bulk like you can at a big brand like Harley-Davidson, it looks a little bit different. Look, every one of us has the same basic situation. We have colleagues, the people we work with in our firms. We have clients, the people that we're doing business with, and the prospects we hope to do business with. And maybe we've got some referral partners. And then we also have this idea of storage, the places we keep the information, the communications we try to track about the relationships that we manage. And on the surface, those storage places like file shares and hard drives and databases and even hard filing cabinets, flashback to the 70s and earlier, and now the cloud, those things make sense. It's easy to kind of take something and put it into there. Email, I mean, who knows how much knowledge we have that's trapped in our email systems, right? But when you take what looks like it makes sense and you multiply it by tens, hundreds, thousands of people and places to keep it, and millions of interactions and transactions, it's not so simple anymore. It starts to make less and less sense. I had a great conversation with somebody just out in the hall and said, we've got so many systems, and one thing I don't want is I don't want things to sync anymore. I don't want things to have to talk to each other anymore because bad stuff happens when we do that. And that's a problem that's facing everybody. One of the things on Harvard Business Review tells us that 19% on average, the average worker spends 19% of their time looking for the information they need to get their job done. 19% is 1 day every week that's lost looking for stuff. And you know what you do when you go look for stuff? You'll often walk down the hall to the cube of your colleague and say, can you help me find this? And now you've distracted them and they're looking for this stuff too. A huge time sink looking for stuff. So what we need is this idea of a corporate memory, of one place where you can put everything that not only you can get to, but all of your colleagues can get to, and your clients can even get to if they need to in a very secured way. A vision that looks something like this. It puts this idea of listening at scale at the center of the organization. So let's take an example, let's take a look at an example of exactly how that looks. And by the way, remember C5 Buck is up there for those of you who would like to tweet. It's up there to remind you, you can do that. So this is going to be really small. I apologize for that. We actually have this, it's all set up on a computer. We can show you tomorrow out in the little exhibit area if you're interested in seeing it. And the other thing I want to say is this is all set up in Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Microsoft Office 365. I'm not here as a keynote speaker to try to convince you that that's the way to go. I'm just trying to give you a vision for how this can look. One person we talked to today uses Salesforce.com. We know that system well. Great system. There's dozens of other ways to look at doing this. I'm just trying to give you a practical example of how this might work. So in this case, I have to look at my notes because I can't read things up there. So in this case, maybe you're meeting with a referral source, someone named Paul Cannon, a certified financial planner, who refers you to an individual named Renee, who's got some issues, and Renee's has some issues she needs help with. So you're sitting at your system, you type in Renee's contact information, you type in the fact that Paul, who we can barely read up there, was a referral source, so you can gradually over time track, hey, who's referring me business and how much that's actually converting into real business so I can thank the people that I'm working with. Renee calls you, shares more information with you, so you log that as a matter in your system. So you capture the basic information about the matter in your system quickly, who it's with, the high-level details of what it's all about, maybe some description. And as you continue to build that relationship with Renee, you're probably going to take a lot of notes. And you can take those maybe in something like Microsoft OneNote, where you can type or you can handwrite them into there. You can start to have that information organized in a separate system, OneNote. Now over time, you may also interact with one of your colleagues, one or more of your colleagues, asking some questions. You might use an internal social network. If any of you use Yammer, it's kind of like Twitter, but for inside of a company. So you might ask a question, have one of your colleagues provide an answer back. Oh yeah, let's connect and I can tell you more about that. You may get emails from this individual and you'd like to have all those put into one place as well. And of course you'll track appointments and have notes associated with those appointments over time as well. The idea here is all of this stuff, although it looks like it's in all sorts of different places, it can all end up in the same place. It can all end up in your client relationship management system. So you have one place to go to see one full view of the customer relationship without having to go navigate 3 different places and have things sync. Even the documents that Renee sends you attached to that email can be put into the system so that you can easily go access those documents later or share them out with Renee or other people. So this is listening at scale. This is the idea of how do I hear what my clients are telling me and how do I store it in a single corporate memory where I and everybody else in my firm can go and have access to that information. But listening and remembering doesn't do us much good if we can't do something to unleash that information. And of course, that's where beer and diapers come in. So what do beer and diapers have to do with customer and client relationship management? So a grocery chain many years ago took a close look at their data. They looked at the shopping cart. It's called a shopping cart analysis. And they looked at what it was that their customers were buying. How big were their shopping carts? How much stuff did they have in them? What type of day? Did that make a difference? Also, they had loyalty programs so they could match things up actually with a lot of demographic information. And lo and behold, they found out that certain times of the evening, especially Friday evenings, but other evenings that happen too, a lot of people had very little stuff in their shopping carts, but often it was beer and diapers. So they started saying, why? Why beer and diapers? Well, as they kind of started looking at it a little bit closer, what happened a lot of times was Mom would call Dad and say, hey, look, I'm at home or I'm picking up the kids on the way home and I can't go by the store. Can you go get some diapers? Dad would go to the store and pick up some diapers. What? As long as Dad was in the store picking up diapers, go get some beer too. Exactly. So it actually caused a revolution in the merchandising for that organization. All of a sudden they said, hey, by listening and understanding, by analyzing this information, we can completely change the mix of what they're going to encounter when they come into the store, so we can get more impulse purchases that this group of people is likely to respond to when they come into the stores. Now, diapers weren't generally associated with that, but now they could be. So brand new discoveries because they took the time to understand. So when we look at our customers as professional services people, there's really 4 ways that we understand them. There's search, ability to quickly find them. There's little data. People talk a lot about big data. We're going to talk about little data. there's big data, and then there's bigger data. So let's drill down into each one of those in a little more detail. So little data is this idea of detailed profile information about one client at a time. There's tons of talk in the marketplace right now about big data, and it's cool. We do a lot of stuff with it. It's fun. It's exciting. I used to work at a bank, and we hacked through all sorts of big data, learned all sorts of interesting things. But little data is actually where a lot more of the action is, especially when you're in the kind of business that interacts one-on-one with your customers one at a time. So here's one quick view of search for little data. So with search, we looked at a couple of things here. I searched for Renee, I think is the name of the individual as our example, and I found 4 things about Renee just by typing her name in. I have a really small database. There's only one Renee. You might use a last name in your database. I found her company record, so I can go pull that up and see the company she works with. I found her contact record. By the way, I put her picture in it so I can see that. I found activities that I'm doing with Renee. So anything I've done with Renee within some period of time actually comes up in this quickly. I can see my emails and appointments and those kinds of things. And I've also found the matter that I'm managing for her right now. If I have active and inactive matters or a bunch of additional matters, all of those come up on the search. One more click and I can drill in and get all of that information. To the right, I search for a document. I type bankruptcy. That's what this matter is related to. And up pop all the documents that have to do with bankruptcy. Now, I might have typed Renee also because I might have a lot of documents in my document management system for that. But all of that could then come in one simple view of the organization. So search is absolutely critical for people being able to find what they need. We've seen a lot of systems people have set up and they said, we got all the information into it, but now to go find what I need to find, I need like 3 PhDs to understand how to go navigate the system to get to the bottom of what's in it. Search should be simple and easy to find what you're looking for. And then, sorry, I jumped the gun and talked a little bit about little data already, but little data is now being able to pull up those records and look at the data about one individual at a time, but have it all in one place. So let's take a look at this one. Again, small type, but we'll kind of point to this. This laser pointer doesn't work very well. So to the left, you'll see the details about the matter. So I can see everything about the matter in one place. The type, the subject matter that's associated with it. I can have different classifications in different parts of my firm that might be dealing with the matter. All the way to the right, I can see some details about the client right there. Their name, their email address, anything critical that I want to put over there that I can see right when I'm looking at the matter. Don't need to go anywhere else to see more information about the client as long as I've put it all there. But if I do want to go deeper into the client, one more click, I can bring up the client record and all sorts of rich detail about the client. Across the top, those bars, that tells me where I am in the process with this matter. I'm in stage 3 right now. We're going to come talk about that in a few minutes, but it's right there visible in this. And in the middle is all of the types of contact I've had with the client or even related to this matter with somebody else. So right now what it's showing is all the emails, all the phone calls, all the appointments, not only with this contact about this matter, but even internal discussions I might have had on it. And I can navigate around to that, so I go over to posts, I can see my internal social conversation about this matter right there. And I can add to and contribute to that social conversation right within the form. And then over on the right, I can click OneNote, and I've got links directly to the OneNote notes that I've taken. So remember all that stuff we talked about on the listen slide? We said we can do this and this and this, and it all lines up in the same place. Here it all is. If somebody else is taking notes on this, if somebody else is tracking emails on this, if somebody else dialogues with this customer, client, or if you go on vacation and somebody else has to interact with this client while you're gone, they can get to this one picture of the client in one place really easily. And they can take it on the road with them too. So this is the idea of understanding at scale and doing it with little data, being able to get to just the tidbits you need in real time. Big data starts to take, if little data is the story of a customer, little data is the story of a client, big data is the aggregate story of hundreds or thousands of clients when you're looking at them in summary. So you can start to learn more about what's going on. People call this a dashboard. It's really like the whole cockpit of the front of your car when you think about it. You can look in the rearview mirror and you can say, where have we been? Well, we can see the number of matters that we had in last week, what the priority was, and how much time we put into each of them. We can look at the funnel and say, I got to look out my front window. Where am I going? What's coming down the pike? Here's the opportunities I have from a sales standpoint that we might be doing something with soon. And I can also look at my matters that I have coming up in the next week on my schedule and see what's going on with them. I can also see the news, what's new with these social conversations I'm having, and I can see my activities, what I've got planned today that I have to get done to fulfill my obligations to my clients and also take care of other tasks like business development types of tasks. One place to see all the data you need, not only to manage your business, but to get your job done. And then there's this idea of bigger data. So big data, if we're trying to put everything we can into as few of the systems as possible, might let me look deeply into that client relationship management system. Bigger data, generally for larger firms, it won't apply necessarily to everybody, but that's when you have no choice but to have multiple different systems. Sometimes you have to have a time tracking system that's different from your client system, or an accounting system that's different. So in those cases, bigger data actually lets you put what's called business intelligence tools over the top of multiple different systems and build reports and dashboards that look across all of that data at once. So you can see a lot of other insights about the customer relationship you may not see just by looking at your client management system. Again, it doesn't apply to everybody, but the bigger an organization is, the more likely they are to need these kinds of tools as well. This is an awesome innovation. Most of you probably know what it is. Some of you younger folks may not know what it is anymore. They're not on desktops as much as they used to do. So I was actually reading a historical fiction book recently, and it takes place, it's in the banking industry, which tells you the kind of level of boredom I have in my life, that I read historical fiction about banking in the 1800s. And the storyline goes that somebody in that bank invented the in-out box, and it just kind of got me thinking about, you take that for granted, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know when that thing was actually invented. It is historical fiction, but it wasn't sometime. Can you imagine life before the in-box and the out-box? I mean, it's crazy to think people had to manage business processes without even having an inbox and outbox. Their desks must have looked like my sales director's desktop looks like or something. I mean, they're crazy and disorganized. So what does that have to do with connecting with our clients? So the idea here is connecting. Most people think of connecting as this art form. Some people are good at connecting, some people aren't. Yes, I've listened and understood, and I've got some good information here, but other people can connect better than I can. To an extent, maybe some of that is true. But the reality is, most of the idea of business process, business connections, are process-oriented. It's the ability to find the key steps to building connections and executing on those steps with discipline, again and again and again. Some of the best salespeople in the world are introverts. They're not people who naturally build connections, but they're workhorses, and they know how to adopt a process, and they know how to work the process really, really, really well. So connections is not this idea of art form and how do I kind of build these more fuzzy relationships, but much more of a process. And how do I develop a consistent set of habits that I can follow? And if I'm going to do that at scale, how do I take those practices and make them common across my organization? That's the idea of connecting. So one great example of an organization that builds great connections with almost all automation, Amazon.com. Amazon.com has hundreds of ways of connecting with their customers. I love working with Amazon.com because they make working with them so easy. So you think about you at Amazon.com, and you're thinking about buying something, you go and you search for it on Amazon, and up it comes, you click on it, and it tells you, by the way, here's all the other things that you might want to buy with it. And here's the other things that people looked at that might also go along with that you want to buy as a follow-up. Oh, it's in your cart now, you're going to check out? Here's a bunch of other things that you might want based on what's in your cart now. Oh, you just bought it? Here's a verification email verifying that you made this purchase. And here's another one thanking you for the purchase and telling you that it's shipping. And here's a portal you can go log into to track your shipment and check all of your orders. And by the way, if you'll do a review for this, then we'll let you know every time somebody likes that review so you know that you've benefited somebody. Oh, and by the way, if you do a lot of those reviews, you'll start earning points. And if you earn enough points, we're going to send you some free stuff because we're really grateful for all the great reviews that you do. Amazon.com does all that without ever talking to anyone. In fact, I don't know if I can talk to somebody at Amazon.com.
Yes, you can.
You can? Okay. Good, that makes sense. You should be able to for that kind of organization. What's different about us, I run a professional services firm. You guys all run professional services firms too. All of our services almost always human to human. Not much of it is automated, but some of it can be. And maybe we're missing a few opportunities there that we should take a look at. So let's take a look at how that might work. This is a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain. This is something we mapped out not too long ago where we said, one of the things we consult our clients on is before you map out your, in this case, sales process, you should map out the process your customer goes through. What's their journey? And then you match your sales process to it. Instead of saying, here's what I want to do, now figure out how I can shoehorn customers into that. Instead say, what are the customers and prospects doing and how do I follow them into that so that I can leverage what they're doing? So the interesting thing, a humbling thing we found when we did this ourselves was we found we were selling at the wrong time in the process. So we've got a lot of real deep experts in our organization, whether it's on the business process side, the technology side, this idea of luck and building relationships, engaging employees. And so most of the things we were doing, webcasts and blogs and those kinds of things, was really deep material. And when we looked at this, we realized the people who are consuming that material, they're the people who are already doing it. They're the people who are already well along the journey, and they're not looking for the help of somebody else. They're saying, thank you very much, we'll take this and apply it ourselves. The people who we really connect with fall into two areas. Very early on, the people who are interested, but not yet fully engaged, and very late in the process, the people who are failing. Remember I said these projects fail about 60% of the time? The people who realize this project is failing and we need to do something about it. And what we also found was even more interesting is we don't want to engage right at the point that they're going to make a buying decision. Because by the time they've said, yeah, I need to talk to someone about buying something, they've learned all sorts of things that they needed to know. How did they learn it? Well, they probably did a lot of web searches, and they might have been engaged with somebody else who was helping to educate them. So we had to start early in the process saying, let's have blogs, let's have webcasts, let's do events like this to help educate people in these areas so that by the time they say, well, that makes sense, I'm ready to move forward with it, they say, who do we work with? Well, the guys we've been working with all along. These guys did all this work to educate us. We trust them. Let's go ahead and get them in to work with us on this. So that's a business development process. What about a process for managing matters? I know you can't read what's up there. I can't read it either. But we'll talk it through conceptually. We can look at it on our computer tomorrow if you're curious about what this might look like. This is just a hypothetical process. But what you see behind me is a 4-step matter management process. So 4 stages really. Each stage can have multiple steps in it. Remember, this is right at the top of the form when I showed you what a matter might look like, what little data might look like inside of CRM, and you saw the process map at the top of it. So you see 4 stages here, but in stage 3, you actually see there's 3 options. So it can go one of 3 different ways depending on what kind of matter this is. So you can branch and walk them through different steps based on whatever they need to do at that particular time. Now what this lets you do is one example, and you might be able to read this a little bit. It allows you to be consistent in what happens in each one of those stages. If you're in a small practice, any small business really, but if you're in a small practice, if someone went and asked all the, let's say, 5 people in your practice, how do you handle a matter, and they took careful notes about how they did it, and they compared them, there'd probably be some similarities, and there'd probably be a whole lot of differences in there too. So there's no consistent way our brains work. We all develop our own way of getting something done. Something like this starts to assure we're going to follow some consistent stages and consistent steps as we go through the process. Some of those steps are optional, so we might say, these aren't, you don't need these every single time, but they're here as reminders. So at least you have to go through the process of looking at it and checking it off, saying, yeah, that's something I considered didn't need to do at that time. Some are required. They're called stage gates. You're not allowed to go to the next stage until you finish this one particular thing. So you can make sure that there are some things that are being consistently done and other things that you're at least consistently reminding people about. So when you're looking at a matter that's in stage 3 for 4 different people in your organization, you know that there's some things in common that got them to that stage that you can work from. The other thing you can do with these kinds of processes is you can start to do some of those Amazon-esque reminders. One of the things we know about professional services in general, law firms are certainly subject to this as well, is that clients don't think we do a good enough job communicating a lot of times. There's radio silence for too long, the types of communications aren't the level of quality they want sometimes. And it's easy because when there's a bunch of people potentially working on a matter, sometimes you think it's in someone else's court to have done something. Or sometimes you've got 30 other ones you're working on, and not everybody always has the intuition to go, gee, it's been 8 days since I talked to that person, and I know this is a high-stress thing for them. Maybe I should check in with them sometime soon. With something like this, you can have that built into the system to say, hey, you should probably communicate with the customer right now. And you can even have options in here, as you see on this one behind me, where you can say, pass I don't need to communicate with them, but at least I'm recording that so we know it didn't happen. You could choose automatic, so you can say, we've already drafted the email template up, and when I choose automatic, it's just going to go out. Hey, why don't you let you know, we've moved your matter to this stage, that means we feel that it's resolved, we'll be calling you in a week to have some follow-up conversation, whatever's in there. You could choose template, and you can say, all right, I'll queue the email up for you, but I'm not going to send it. You'll have an opportunity to revise it before it goes out the door. So those kinds of things can be peppered directly into the process so that you don't miss those key opportunities to be communicating with someone, and you don't have to beat yourself up constantly trying to remember or keep an Excel spreadsheet or written notes, trying to remind yourself who you have and have not communicated and when. The last part of the luck principle is knowing. So what's up there behind me is a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. 25 tons of steel and 103 feet long. So what does a B-17 World War II Flying Fortress have in common with the no part of luck? Well, as it turns out, quite a bit. We talked about how luck is one of the harder parts of this process earlier on when I walked through and summary at the beginning of this. What was happening in World War II was the B-17 was actually a critical strategic part of the Allied group's plans for victory. But it wasn't going so well. A lot of B-17 bombers were not coming back when they go in their bombing runs. So the military analysts took a look at these airplanes because they said, if we don't work this out, we might have a real problem here. We may not be able to win this war. And so they looked at where all the holes were in the planes and came back and they said, we can't put armor across the whole belly of this. We got to be careful about where we put it so it's still light enough to take off. So they reinforced where the holes were. Off went the bombers. Same number of bombers got shot down. They had a real problem. Along came a gentleman by the name of Abraham Wall, a Hungarian war refugee who made his way to England. He took a look at the airplanes and listened to what they said and said, you're measuring the wrong thing. You're measuring success. You're not measuring the failures. You're measuring the holes in the ones that came back. You should be looking at the holes in the ones that were shot down. Now, they didn't have the ability to go look at the ones that were shot down, but at least they could infer some things and say, well, they're probably getting shot where these ones are not getting shot. So let's put the armor where we don't see the bullet holes in the ones that came back home. And lo and behold, more airplanes started coming back home, and we know how the story ultimately ended. So, what's the connection? The connection there is we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. And the no part of luck is about continuous learning. It's about constantly taking the microscope and pointing it inward. If understanding is looking outward at our clients, knowing is looking inward at ourselves, saying, what do we do wrong? How do we make it better? How do we improve it? And so since it's similar to understanding, the concepts we have associated with it are also similar. We're going to look at a lot of data to make that decision. But the way we look at it, the way we gather it might be a little bit different. So another little peek into our organization, something we do whenever we have a project, and projects for us are usually pretty significant engagements. It's not a small matter that comes and goes. It's something that usually hundreds of hours goes into. We have a lessons learned meeting built directly into the project. And we get the whole team together that worked on that project, and we've got to exercise a lot of vulnerability and humility to look closely at projects and say, what went wrong with that? Where did we fail? And how are we going to do it better next time? And we're all prideful, so we don't want to do that, but we have to. We also do something else called The Great Game of Business. It's in the tweets. It's a great book for you guys to think about reading and looking at for running your firms. But it's this idea of running your business a little bit more like a game, where everybody knows the score, and everybody even gets to help keep track of the score. And everybody gets to celebrate together when you have wins. So just as important it is to be humble and embrace your failures, it's also important to celebrate your wins and your victories together. So we track information just right in Microsoft Excel for doing that. There's a lot of neat ways you can summarize it. We've actually found it's really, really powerful to tell people you own that metric, you go find the metric, and you type it into the Excel spreadsheet, and when we meet weekly, you're going to report to the company on it. That's much more powerful than everyone getting in a room and saying, here's the dashboard, and there's the number, and how are we going to talk about that? So there's kind of a power in not automating some of these things. And there's a whole cadence of meetings that companies that are successful with this use to engage better. So it's not just about data, it's not just about process, It's about a planned and consistent and disciplined way of engaging with each other to change how you're doing business. And then the last piece is sort of the big data piece. And that's not us, that's an example of something else that I pulled from the retail industry. But that's the ability to look even broader at how your business is doing. The way we look at that is the big data for us is the performance indicators. The things we know if we're doing regularly and with discipline, like follow-up phone calls and billable hours and those kinds of things. Those are going to lead to the outcomes we want. The bigger data is the actual outcome. Hey, how are our revenues doing? How is our profitability doing? How are we doing in this territory versus that territory? How are we doing Salesforce projects versus Dynamics CRM projects versus SharePoint projects? All those kinds of things come in there. So all of our firms can kind of learn from that. But the hard part about this process is, number one, it takes time. So a lot of people just don't do it because we got to move on to the next thing. And so we lose the discipline to actually go back and learn our lessons. But as I said before, it takes vulnerability, it takes humility. And if that's not coming from the top down, and it's not just top down, it has to be top down and also side to side, but if that's not happening from the top down in the organization, it's not going to happen side to side in the organization either. And the toughest organizations to make this happen in are organizations full of type A people who are owning the company or pressed doing business with clients all the time. Organizations exactly like the organizations that you guys work in. So that brings us to our next point. And that's this idea of the secret ingredient. So we call the secret ingredient good luck. Now, luck itself evolved over a lot of years. It was a number of years ago we kind of first developed the acronym. We'll continue to fine-tune to the point that Laura mentioned that I'm writing a book on it that'll be out. It'll be done in the next couple of months. I'm not sure when it'll be out. And as that evolved, it transformed so many things. But we kind of kept looking at failures, and we saw some troubling things. And we said, you know, Company A and Company B that we worked with seem to have a lot of the same things in place, but one of them's still failing at this. What's the difference? Everything else seems to be the same. And that's where we discovered this idea of what we call good luck. So it's a very fuzzy around the edges type of concept. Probably the best way I can describe it is with the story of the bricklayers. Some of you may have heard this before. Great story. So a man is walking down the street, comes upon a construction site. Several people are working on different parts of a wall. And he stops and asks the first person, what are you working on? And he says, I'm building a wall. Okay, pretty self-evident. Walks up to the next person. What are you doing? I'm a mason. I'm laying bricks. Fair enough. Walks up to the third person and says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a temple that's going to last hundreds of years. And in this temple, people will celebrate the birth of new life and new marriage together. And they'll say final farewells to some of their closest friends. And they'll experience their Creator. I'm building something that hundreds and thousands of stories will be lived out in every day. They were all doing the same thing. But the third guy wasn't working a job. The third guy had a vision and a purpose and a mission for what he was doing. And that's the fundamental of good luck. What we found when we looked at our clients who were succeeding and who weren't succeeding, when we found that in the DNA of their organization was this idea of passionately serving customers and passionately serving each other. If that was in their stitching, if that was in the very fabric of their organization, they're going to figure this out. But if they looked at luck as that's a handy process for me to get some more money and raise profitability, and I don't want to say those things like they're evil, because I like all those things in my business too, but if that was their sole driver for it, the chances for failure went up significantly. We did some research, and we found some research rather, and we found that when organizations document a mission, and that document mentions integrity, it makes absolutely no difference as to how successful they are or how satisfied their employees are. None whatsoever. But when you talk to an organization's employees, and the employees say, my organization behaves with integrity, it makes a tremendous amount of difference as to how successful they are and how satisfied their employees are and how hard they're going to work to fulfill the mission of that organization. The lesson learned is we can think about good luck as writing a mission. I believe in that. We have a written mission. I like that kind of thing. But having a written mission and not living out that mission has no impact whatsoever. It's a waste of time. Living a mission, whether it's written or not, that has a tremendous impact. So, summarizing, the left principle about 3 things. Listening and remembering what we hear. When we do it individually, it goes up here, but when we do it as a company, it goes into this corporate memory. And then acting on that information, understanding it with search and little data and big data and bigger data. And then connecting, forming more meaningful relationships by looking at that information and following a consistent process. And when you design a process for the first time, one thing I'm absolutely sure of, it's a horrible process. But when you start following it and you start going through the no cycle next, you start to have something you can improve instead of sitting around guessing because everyone's doing something different and you're not quite sure why the wheels are falling off of the car. And that's the no piece. And all of that is supported by this foundation, ideally, of good luck. And I'm not saying good luck is required to be successful. We work with a number of firms who I would say don't really have that at their core and still manage to do pretty good with it. They're tightly run types of organizations. But it certainly is a big booster to it. And I'm not here to tell you that this is a fast or simple thing. Technology is great. Processes are great. We spend a lot of time playing with technology, doing processes, but the transformation in your organization is slow, and it takes a lot of discipline and a lot of work. One thing about these kinds of client-facing systems, client information management systems, is unlike accounting systems, you don't necessarily have to use them to get your work done. So one of our clients came to us and said, look, we're on our 3rd try. We've done this twice before, and it felt like New Year's resolutions. Everyone was excited and started to use it, and then it fizzled out. And I thought that is the best mental picture of how these systems work. Because unlike an accounting type of system or your time entry type of system, oftentimes there's a lot of pieces of this you don't have to use. And it sits there like that membership to the fitness club, reminding you, you really should be using me. But, you know, I'm really busy and I can't make it to the club today. And you know what? I'm really harried right now, and I don't want to go type that little extra tidbit about a note about this client into the system that maybe 6 or 9 months from now is actually going to do me a world of good. You've got to get into the habit of it. And that's where the meeting cadence and the no piece actually comes in to really help to reinforce that. The best athletes in the world, they have a coach. You need your own coaches, either externally or somehow internally, to hold you accountable and keep you moving forward. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this is part of maybe beginning a transformation and getting you thinking about some things and maybe seeing some of the possibilities that are out there with some of these CRM types of tools. But I hope you'll go back and you'll also talk to some of your colleagues about this. And there's 2 ways to do it. One of them will be really engaging, and one of them you need to be really careful about. So it all goes down to presentation. You got to kind of, almost follow the luck principle here. So if you go back and they say, what did you learn? And you say, we learned about the luck principle. That piques your luck? What? They're talking, what do you mean luck? And then you can talk them through it because you pique their interest. But if you said, all I learned out was how to get lucky, you're going to get a completely different response. So be careful with that. Thank you all so much. I'm going to hang around tonight too to chat, and we'll be here tomorrow too if you want to do any demos. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks.